Imagine walking into a massive luxurious bank. The year is 2007. You have no steady job and a terrible credit score. In a rational world, no responsible bank would ever lend you a single dollar. But this is not a normal world. The smiling banker shakes your hand and hands you a massive loan to buy a beautiful house. You are thrilled. Millions of ordinary Americans are doing the exact same thing. The entire nation is caught in an intoxicating frenzy of buying real estate. People genuinely believe that housing prices will go up forever. It feels like an era of endless wealth. But the magic is actually a dangerous lie. The foundation of the entire global economy is built on a mountain of garbage. When this fragile mountain suddenly collapses, it will wipe out trillions of dollars in days. It will completely destroy century-old banking empires and force millions of hard-working families out of their homes. This is the terrifying story of the 2008 financial crisis. It is a story of unmatched corporate greed, blind ambition, and the devastating crash that brought the modern world to the edge of total economic ruin. To understand how the world almost ended, we have to look at Wall Street. For many decades, the American banking system was heavily regulated. It was considered boring but completely safe. But by the late 1990s, many strict rules were stripped away. Massive banks were suddenly allowed to take unprecedented risks with the money of their clients. They invented incredibly complex financial products. One of the most dangerous inventions was a special type of investment based on simple home mortgages. The concept was highly complicated, but the goal was simple. The banks would take thousands of ordinary home loans and pack them together into a single financial bundle. They would then sell pieces of this bundle to huge investors around the globe. The investors loved these products. They believed American real estate was the safest bet in the universe. Because the demand for these bundles was incredibly high, Wall Street banks desperately needed more home loans to package and sell. But there was a massive problem. They had already given loans to all the responsible people who could afford them. To keep the money machine running, the banks had to completely lower their standards. They started giving massive loans to people who could never pay them back. These dangerous agreements were called subprime mortgages. The bankers knew these loans were incredibly risky. But they simply did not care about the consequences. They immediately sold them to someone else, collected a massive fee, and washed their hands of the danger. The agencies that rated the safety of these investments also completely failed their duty. They gave their highest rating to bundles of loans that were destined to fail. Everyone was making far too much money to ask any difficult questions. The entire financial system was flying completely blind toward a massive mountain. By the middle of 2007, reality finally hit. Interest rates slowly began to rise. Millions of people who had taken out those risky subprime loans suddenly could not afford their monthly payments. They began to default. They walked away from their homes in pure desperation. Suddenly, the housing market was heavily flooded with empty houses. The prices of homes began to plummet like a heavy stone. The massive bundles of mortgages, which the global investors had purchased, became completely worthless overnight. Giant banks on Wall Street suddenly realized they were holding trillions of dollars of toxic assets. The trust between the massive financial institutions completely evaporated. Banks stopped lending money to each other entirely. The global flow of credit simply froze solid in an instant. The dark panic began to spread with terrifying speed. In March of 2008, a massive investment bank called Bear Stearns completely collapsed. The federal government had to rush in and arrange a desperate rescue to prevent a wider panic. The public was shocked, but the government promised that the worst was over. They were terribly wrong. The true, unprecedented nightmare was waiting for September. There was another massive banking empire on Wall Street. It had survived the Great Depression and 2 world wars. It was considered an immortal giant of modern finance. But in September 2008, the immortal giant was bleeding to death. The bank was heavily burdened with worthless real estate investments. They desperately begged the government for a massive financial rescue. They pleaded with other banks to buy them out. But this time, the government firmly said no. They wanted to teach Wall Street a harsh lesson about taking reckless risks. On Monday, September 15th, the giant bank officially filed for bankruptcy. It remains the largest bankruptcy filing in the history of the United States. The collapse of this bank sent a catastrophic shockwave across the entire planet. Global stock markets went into a terrifying freefall. Trillions of dollars of wealth simply vanished from retirement accounts in a matter of hours. Large companies could not get short-term loans to pay their employees. Shipping containers stopped moving across the oceans. The entire global financial engine was grinding to a complete halt. The leaders of the United States government realized they had made a massive miscalculation. They realized the major banks were deeply connected to every single part of the economy. If they allowed the banking system to completely fail, it would trigger a second Great Depression. The unemployment rate would skyrocket, and the nation would face absolute ruin. In a deeply controversial move, the government proposed a historic rescue plan. They asked Congress for hundreds of billions of taxpayer dollars to buy the toxic assets from the failing banks. The American public was furiously angry. They could not understand why their hard-earned tax money was being used to save the wealthy bankers who had caused the entire disaster. The bankers kept their massive bonuses, while ordinary citizens lost their homes and jobs. Despite the heavy public anger, the government pushed the massive rescue package through. They injected billions of dollars directly into the banking system. Slowly, agonizingly, the terrible panic began to subside. The immediate threat of a total global collapse was finally avoided. But the deep, painful scars of the crisis would last for a generation. Millions of Americans lost their homes to foreclosure. Millions more lost their jobs and life savings. The crisis revealed the dark side of unchecked corporate power. It proved that the modern financial system is incredibly fragile. New regulations were eventually put into place to prevent another catastrophic bubble. But many people still wonder if the giant banks truly learned their lesson, or if they are simply waiting to inflate the next balloon. The financial crash devastated the physical economy of the nation. But what happens when an entirely different kind of threat emerges from the unseen, microscopic world? What happens when a silent, highly contagious virus sweeps across the globe, forcing entire nations to lock their doors and hide in fear? In our next episode, we will travel to the terrifying early days of the global pandemic. We will uncover the empty streets, the overwhelmed hospitals, and the unprecedented shutdown of modern human life. Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button and join us next time as we continue to uncover the thrilling hidden chapters of history.